Geoff Wood is the risk manager at Morphic Asset Management, and he joins me live from our Sydney CBD studio. Geoff, thanks very much for joining us. Let's talk about some of these Trump moves. I mean, it was part of his campaign. Very much his base want him to make America great again. He said he'd, insist on making sure that American jobs were protected, American products were made in America. But really, this is the first move he's done to slap big tariffs on.
Exactly, yeah. This is the first move really after the Trans-Pacific Partnership in terms of actually coming good on his pledge on the trail. I mean, what he's trying to do here again is appeal to the heartland of America and get more manufacturing jobs back in America, on American soil.
Yeah, now, who are going to be the losers? I mean, presumably there are some Asian companies that will lose. I think Samsung's one of the big, or the biggest washing machine makers that sends them over stateside. But, this is what the base wants. But will the base, Mr. Trump's base, gain out of this move?
It's a good question. I mean, if you asked an economist, the theoretical answer would be that everyone will lose because the Americans will have less choice in their products, and the choice that they do have, they'll end up paying more for. And then on the Asian side, obviously, they're going to get less revenue from their export. So that would be the sort of theoretical answer, but that doesn't necessarily play into politics, especially in the short term.
Yeah, but it's interesting because over the next month there are supposed to be more tariffs being looked at. Just give us the background on that.
So we've got a steel review and an aluminium review coming up within the next sort of 6 weeks to 2 months. That'll be important for China and also vis-a-vis Australia. And then probably the big one, which will be around the sort of Northern Hemisphere summer, will be a review of intellectual property. And this one really eats into the heart of tech globally. And this is where things like Taiwanese stock markets, which are a large exporter into the US on phones and all these sort of hardware components, they'll be particularly watching these outcomes.
Now, there were some other deals that, earlier this month, AT&T sort of pulled out of a deal to distribute Huawei phones in the United States.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this didn't get too much coverage, but AT&T, the big global telecoms distributor, were going to do the first deal with Huawei, where they would essentially be selling those phones into the US. Now, the rumours are that the US government have pushed back on that, sort of on security fears, that they don't like the idea that it'll be a Chinese manufacturer that will be distributing through their market. Now, the US government got a large amount of leverage on AT&T at the moment because they're trying to get through this Time Warner deal. So what you've got is lots of little pieces of this jigsaw all coming together, where tariffs on one side, pulling back on big deals on the other. And then 2 Wednesdays ago, we had rumours out of China from non-official sources, but nevertheless it has some credibility, that they would be refraining from buying US government bonds, which is a classic sort of tit-for-tat response.
Yeah, so look, that's really interesting because that's sort of the flip side, isn't it? That the US pushes too hard on this and the Chinese say, well, we stop buying US Treasuries, and what would that do to US debt? Yeah,
exactly. Ultimately, if you have one of your biggest buyers pulling out of the market, then your cost of funding will increase. Now, this would be kind of like shooting yourself in the foot for the Chinese, because as soon as they say they're stopping buying US government debt, the prices will fall and their holdings will fall in value. So it's somewhat an empty threat, but nevertheless it is something in their ammunition should it escalate to those levels.
Yeah, look, it's a really interesting one. It's, in a sense, probably nothing will happen on that score, will it? The Chinese, is it more a hollow threat, do you think?
I think it's a hollow, but it's like a lot of these things where ultimately when push comes to shove, it can be done, and it's a threat there. I think what would be more realistic is that the Chinese would actually stop buying sort of medium to longer dated treasuries and then focus in the sort of front end, the sort of 2 to 3 year space. So when these new projects that the government sign off, such as a wall on the Mexican border, they typically fund those through longer dated securities, and the Chinese just say, we've got no interest in funding that.
Yeah, look, it's so interesting because in the end, Geoff, do you think those sorts of washing machine manufacturers and solar panel manufacturing jobs are going to come back to the United States? Because is that what is the president's real aim, to get the jobs for those sorts of products put back into the US?
Well, the interesting thing was one of the big solar lobby panels in the US was actually against putting this tariff in place, and their argument is there's a lot of jobs on US soil that go into actually putting these things in and supplying,
installing them
parts.
essentially, rather than manufacturing them. Yeah,
correct, exactly. So by reducing the supply, it impacts the market in that regard. But I think Trump will just argue the other side. We've had some great news where Apple are going to be pulling back offshore earnings into the US, and they're going to be doing capex to fund some projects at home. So it won't stop Trump spinning a great story.
Okay. All right, Geoff Wood, great to talk to you from Morphic Asset Management. We didn't get to talk markets today, but there's so much trade talk around. We'll do that next week. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Anna.